Hi. So I regularly get the question, what is EMDR therapy? So I'd like to take a few minutes to just talk a little bit about what EMDR therapy is. There's more information on my website. Um, and I'd also like to just give a little bit of information about how the brain works and how trauma affects the brain. And that's going to help my EMDR explanation. So I'm going to start by just talking about the brain for just a moment. This is just a simplified version. So if we can imagine for a moment that this is our brain, this part of our brain is our frontal lobe, and our frontal lobe is responsible for our logic and reasoning. It helps us have words and be able to form words, to have conversations. All of that takes place here. This middle part of our brain houses both our emotion center as well as our limbic system. And our emotion center is where our emotions are stored. And there's some wonderful information that's come out to show how we have a whole range of emotions, and they're all a part of everybody's life, a part of everybody's brain. I'll reference that on my website, but it's just research that PANGSAP has done. And it's just been able to really bring to light the importance of being able to just feel your emotions and express emotions, because it's just a natural part of who all of us are. Another part of our midbrain is our limbic system, and our limbic system is in charge of keeping us safe. It helps us know, it's in charge of our survival. So it helps us know when we're in danger, or even someone that cares for us is in danger. And then it helps our body go into the necessary whatever it needs to do to help us stay safe. So a couple of those things that our brain will just really guide us into to help us survive a traumatic situation or a dangerous situation is it helps us fight if fighting is an option. It helps us run if running is an option. Or if neither one of those are an option, then it helps us go into a freeze response, which could, because maybe running and fighting just aren't an option, and that wouldn't keep us safe. And so being really, really still is something that would keep us safe. And then the last response, the final ditch effort that our brain makes to help us stay alive, is called collapse and submit. And that brings me to the final part of our brain, which is our brain stem. This lower part of our brain and our brain stem is in charge of our organ functioning and basically just helping our heart pump and our lungs to be able to breathe, just to continue to keep us alive. And so this last part is, again, that last ditch effort for us to just be able to stay alive. Very similar to kind of the trauma response that we see a possum does, or even a fainting goat, where they look like they're dead, but they're not. Their body is still kicking and still staying alive and keeping us alive. That last ditch effort that humans brain systems actually make to stay alive looks very similar in that the collapse and submit. So as we talk about brain functioning, let me talk just a moment about trauma responses. So when we experience something that's traumatic, and there's both we call big T traumas and little t traumas. So big T traumas are the things that we think about that are traumatic, like natural disasters or physical assaults, rapes, or we're witnessing someone that we care about that's being assaulted. Those are all what we would think about when we consider trauma, big T trauma. And then there's also little t trauma, which are more related to relationship breaches, or like being in public and shamed in public. So you're not necessarily in danger, but there's this overwhelming sense of shame that just kind of comes over you and wanting to hide. And the brain, actually what we're learning is the brain can go into a very similar response with small t traumas as it does with big T traumas. And so that's just real interesting research that's coming out, especially if there's a prolonged, so it may be that some people haven't ever experienced a big T trauma, but they've experienced lots of small T traumas. And those combined small T traumas can look like a big T trauma in terms of reactions and responses that look very similar to PTSD. So let me back up and let's just talk a little bit about that trauma response. So when we do experience a trauma moment, our brain's natural response is that this kind of goes offline. We don't necessarily need logic and reasoning to get us through. This limbic system lets us know we're in danger, and then our brain will sift through those ways of helping us survive the fight, flight, freeze, or then collapse and submit. and it will keep choosing the one that's going to work until it works. And so we stay safe, we get through that incident, we're able to survive, we get through it, and then it may be a couple days, it may be a couple of weeks, but what happens is our system starts kind of reprocessing or processing what happened, and our brain naturally just kind of can get rid of what we don't need about that incident and keep what we do need about that incident. And that typically happens through REM sleep. That's what research is showing us. And so when we go to sleep, if you've ever noticed someone's eyes are moving back and forth in that REM sleep, you may even notice when someone's in that really deep REM sleep, they may be twitching and moving. Sometimes we can even wake up and have tears on our face, like there's emotions that are happening. Like the brain is naturally, like all of our defenses are down, and the brain naturally will just do what it needs to do to clear out things, incidences that happen. For some people, that process gets interrupted. So either nightmares get interrupted, or they have a lot of interrupted sleep, or maybe just not good sleep patterns. And so that natural processing that the brain does when we do go into REM gets interrupted, and so the reprocessing doesn't happen. And if that takes place after a trauma incident, then we start seeing that the trauma symptoms that now are classified as post-traumatic stress disorder. And those trauma symptoms look like aggression, which is that fight response that's kind of stuck. Sometimes it can look like really exaggerated avoidance, which is kind of that run response that kind of gets stuck in there. And then people also tend to have this really negative belief about themselves or the world that kind of gets stuck in that as well. So if that doesn't get processed by the brain, what happens is it gets stored or stuck in this limbic system area, this part of the brain in the limbic system. And so then when we're out and about, or folks are out and about and just going about their day, but then they see somebody or they see a certain color or smell a certain thing that reminds their brain of that incident, then what happens is, boom, we immediately go into that trauma response again, because our brain doesn't know that it's not happening again. And so that's what we're talking about when people get triggered, is it's a good indication that that trauma incident that happened is still stuck in the brain. And remember, that can be big T traumas or even little t traumas. And so their responses that they give are similar to the responses that they had at the time of the trauma or the little t trauma. And if we kind of take that a step further, if it looks like people having an overreaction, like this really grandiose reaction, which it can look like an overreaction, like aggressively, but it can look like an overreaction non-aggressively as well, kind of like a collapse, or just I'm not here all of a sudden, and in response to a situation that doesn't necessarily make sense to the situation now. When we're seeing that, then that gives us an indication that it's possible that there is some memories that haven't been processed that are stuck in that limbic system, and they're getting triggered, and it's letting the brain know, oh, you're in danger, when you're not actually in danger. And so what EMDR does is it specifically, there's an eight phase protocol that we follow, and part of the protocol begins with phase 1 is just getting history, understanding the client, very similar to all counseling processes. Phase 2 is about really helping clients develop some skills to help kind of calm down that brain and have some other coping responses other than the ones that they developed out of those trauma responses. And then phase 3, and also in phases 1 and 2, is helping to identify, all right, what are those memories that are stuck there in that limbic system? And then phases 4 through 7 helps the brain just really reprocess in a really natural way what it hasn't been able to do through the REM process, or what it wasn't able to do in the REM process. But we're doing that in an awake state. So what's really interesting is, and what I offer folks is, EMDR actually works with the brain's natural way of healing. It will naturally let go of what it doesn't need and keep what it does. And the way that it works the best is when we can really just let it do what it needs to do, very similar to what happens in REM. So your body may twitch, or you may feel like crying and need to cry, or you may have some really random thoughts like we do in dreams, or these connections to other things that don't make any sense at all, which is very similar to what can happen in dreams. But when we can just let that happen, the system really, our brains and our whole bodies know exactly what it needs to heal. When we can just trust that and let that happen, then it does. The brain will reprocess that information, and then it moves to a different part of the brain. And there's actually some research that has been able to show that physical movement from that midbrain to a different part of the brain where it's just the memory and it's not getting activated or triggered anymore. And so I love the EMDR process for that reason, because it really is, it's an organic way of helping the system process and reprocess incidences that seem to be stuck in that middle part of the brain. And there's lots of research. I'm going to link that on my website to other sites where you can see where EMDR, they're finding it not only works with trauma, but it can be, it's shown to be effective with other things like some anxiety disorders. There's some research that's been shown that it can be used with some success with OCD and panic attacks and phobias, and also some research where it's shown to be some effective with some depression. And so I'll link that on my website as well. So if you're interested in knowing more about EMDR, there's more information on my site. You can also go to emdr.com or emdria.org. Those are some really great resources. And you're also welcome to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.